Magnus Carlsen dominated the Isle of Man Open tournament, winning with a score of 7.5 out of 9. Sure, it was a great feeling for him to bounce back after getting knocked out in only the third round of the World Cup. The decisive game for him came in the penultimate round when he faced Fabiano Caruana with the black pieces. So Caruana with white plays a Spanish, and Carlsen didn't go in for the Berlin. He played quite an adventurous system with black, so we were guaranteed a big fight after he played bishop c5. This is a sharp variation. He has played this before. Well, for example, against Karyakin in his World Championship match last year. Didn't do too well in that game. Scraped a draw. It is a really sharp system with lots of theory. I think when the bishop comes out to c5, it's very aggressively posted, looking down towards white's king. But of course, defensively, it's a little bit scary for black because the bishop has less influence on the king's side, protecting maybe g7 or covering this diagonal. So on with the game. A4, this is the standard response. And rook b8 avoids 8 takes b5, d4, and the bishop came back to b6. And now the most common move here is a takes b5, as Karyakin played against Carlsen, and there is masses of theory on this line. All terribly sharp, but pretty well worked out. But instead, Caruana played a5, which has been seen quite a lot before, but certainly not as well worked out as a takes b5. So that's interesting. You can see Caruana really wanting a fight as well. Now, if this is taken, then you can actually just ditch and exchange, and this gives white fantastic compensation. So, for example, if this is recaptured, we can take here at knight e5, threatening these two. Or in this position of knight g4, then bishop g5 gives fantastic compensation as well. So black has to just retreat that bishop. Now this might look slightly odd for white. Why is he playing a4 and not opening the a file and just closing the position? Well, the point is this, that, well, first of all, h3, now that stops any nonsense with bishop g5. That pin is annoying, and also after bishop e3 prevents knight g4 hassling that bishop. So now we can see the point of playing this move a5. Once the bishop comes to e3, then white is actually threatening to take on e5 because this bishop is going to be loose. So in fact, black's only sensible move here is to play rook a8. So this is the justification of playing this line with a5, that actually white is able to develop very sensibly, and it involves a loss of time for black with this move rook a8. So Caruana continues developing normally, rook e1. Watch out for a very typical Spanish trick here. If knight e4, mistake, then bishop d5 wins a piece. So in this position, after rook e1, h6 played, and white continues normally, knight d2. Now, interestingly, Caruana had this exact position in a previous round in the Isle of Man tournament against the English Grandmaster Gawain Jones, and Jones exchanged on d4, played knight b4, which, okay, doesn't look like a bad square for the knight, but actually it allows white to develop a pretty powerful initiative on the king's side. And later on, Jones suffered from the fact that these pieces were rather sidelined on the queen's side. So instead of that, Carlsen was ready with his position, obviously well prepared, played rook e8. Well, this looks like a very logical move, increasing pressure on e4. And now, again, we can see that Caruana has a lot of experience with this position. He's actually played the black side of this position on 2 occasions, against Karyakin and against Gashimov. And, well, he's had to face knight f1 and bishop c2, normal Spanish moves. But Caruana was ready with a big new move, g4, very aggressive indeed, possibly wanting to open up the g file with g5. And as I mentioned earlier, when this bishop is way across on the other side of the board, then this advance seems justified. If the bishop were on f8, I would be less keen on a move like g4, although still possible. But this is extremely dangerous for black. Carlsen now realised that he'd been caught in some home prep, and he thought for 21 minutes in this position. And, well, he admitted afterwards he was worried. He came up with a pretty good move, Queen e7, which doesn't look like any great shakes, but actually, well, we can see the point. If Caruana pushes on with g5, this gets exchanged, knight g5, so looks dangerous, threatening the pawn on f7. But here's why Carlsen moved his queen to e7. He would then play knight d8, covering f7, and he's ready to play the knight into e6. For example, after queen f3, knight e6. So this blocks out these pieces and really bolsters black's defensive position, as well as putting a bit of pressure here. Now, I still think this is playable for white. You could, for example, trade off on e6 and play the king to the h file and rook to g1, but it feels as though black should be okay in that position. So after a little think, Caruana played his knight into f1. Okay, this looks reasonable to switch the knight to g3. Carlsen played knight d8 anyway, very interesting, because he wants to attack white's centre with c5, so he's trying to get some counterplay here. And this is a big moment in the game. How should white proceed? Do you leave the pawn here? Do you push on? Do you trade on e5 or c5? Or do you just leave the position? At first you think d5 looks very attractive, because it leaves this knight stuck on the back rank. It can no longer move to e6 or back to c6. In fact, this would give black counterplay, because after c4 and this trade, then the knight will bounce back out to b7 and c5, possibly even taking this pawn, but certainly black has counterplay there. Knight h4 is an interesting move, just with the simple idea of coming into f5, typical Spanish. To me, this looks like quite an attractive option. Then the queen might slide away. Maybe knight f5 takes. And then the knight comes to e6. I mean, there were alternatives to those moves, but this seems like a plausible continuation. That knight coming to e6, I think, basically rescues black in this position. I still prefer white. I like the two bishops. I like the knight on f5. But that knight does apply pressure to d4. It does cover the f4 and g5 squares as well. But that was a plausible continuation for Caruana. Instead, he waited. He just played queen to d2. And this also looks very reasonable, connecting the rooks and putting a bit of pressure here. c4 from Carlsen, pushing the bishop back. And then knight h7. Here I think Caruana makes a mistake. He thought for 38 minutes. That feels like he got confused if you're thinking for that long in a game. 38 minutes is a bit too long. He could have still played the knight into f5. I'm guessing he kind of talked himself out of this move. I think this is a reasonable way for white to play, and then play the king to h1 and rook to g1. Now black has been able to bolster his king side, but still, I would prefer white's position here. Still possible to double on the g file and get something. He could also just wait for a moment with king g2. Or, well, also king h2 or king h1 are possible there as well. But b4, it seems to me, goes in the wrong direction. It seems to me he was obviously concerned about this a pawn, but actually, of course, Carlsen just exchanges and now is able to apply some pressure on the c file. And it's going to be much more difficult for white to attack on the king side now that black has opened the queen side. So bishop e6, good moves, blunting out the important Spanish bishop, which Caruana drops back to c2 anyway. He could still play knight f5 there. Maybe that was a better alternative. Now Carlsen gets serious counterplay. Rook c8, so pressure here. Knight b7, so that knight, which very often in the Spanish struggles to find a good square, actually here it's hitting that pawn on a5, and suddenly Carlsen is back in the game. It's difficult to defend that pawn successfully, so Caruana gives it up, but you can see white's pieces here, they're going in the wrong direction. Carlsen takes. There seems to be no reason why you can't just take that pawn. If queen a3, then knight b3, of course. So knight d2 from Caruana covers the b3 square, but again, white is retreating here, and well, I think Carlsen has a number of good moves here. Knight g5 is a strong move, but d5 is absolutely the strongest continuation, just exploding the center. And then we'll see that this advance of the g-pawn looks rash, because white's heavy pieces are on the queen side, and suddenly the position opens and white's king is in trouble. So Caruana shuffles back to e1, but that of course is an admission that things have gone wrong. Bishop b8 now. We'll hear more from that bishop later on in the game, but that's the first indication that white's king is in big trouble. And I think from now on it is one-way traffic. This is a very unpleasant position. Not only is white a pawn down, but defending his king is not an easy matter. And that knight is going to bounce around back into play via one of these squares any moment. That rook doing a really good job on c6, defending his extra pawn, but also at some moment could of course switch across the 6th rank. So Caruana shuffled his rooks back into the middle, but after knight g5, well, you can see he would love to return that pawn to g2 to cover the f3 and h3 squares, but no longer possible. Knight threatens h2. Well, you could play king h2 here, but let me just show you the kind of initiative that black has in this position. This is so unpleasant to play. So white's piece is just getting pushed backwards. Knight coming into c5, it could go to a4, could go to e6 and then into f4. This is a terrible position for white. Caruana played here c4, but this position just loosens his point on d4, and this is absolutely hopeless now. So first of all, Carlsen trades on e1, so there are no dangers on the d file. Rook goes away from d1. Bishop e6, very simple move. Now the d file opens for the queen. And, well, if, for example, bishop e3, you could exchange, take on f5, and simply take on h3, and now that's 2 extra pawns for black, and white's king wide open. Just compare the king positions. I often like to say this. It's a decisive factor in this game. So after bishop e6, that bishop is en prise. Caruana, short of time, defended it with queen e3, but that lost instantly to a really elegant move. Bishop f4 from Carlsen. Here Caruana resigned. Of course, if queen takes bishop, then knight h3 check with a deadly fork. And if the queen goes back, then again you can just take here and There's another fork on f3. Caruana is utterly lost. So there we go. What a bounce back from Carlsen. A dominating performance in this very strong Isle of Man tournament. And, well, he's had an uneven year. Some people are starting to question his abilities. But well, at the moment, looking at the live rating list, Carlsen is first still with 28.37. In second place, Aronian with 28.01. So that is a huge gap still. Crisis for Carlsen? That's the kind of crisis I'd like to have.